Hello, everybody. We are talking about the book, What the Nurses Saw. And one of the nurses that we interviewed was Kimberly Overton. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for coming back. Kimberly is one of the many nurses in the book who devoted a lot of time to contributing content and answering our questions and helping us form an understanding of what happened in the hospitals. And we were saying during the COVID catastrophe, and what's become apparent to me now that the book is out, and I'm talking to more people, including the families of victims, that this is ongoing. One group that I'm working with, Minnesotans for Medical Justice, tells me, yeah, people are still dying every week this way. And when we say this way, what we're talking about is a very specific protocol that is enforced with an iron fist. And basically, once you find yourself on that conveyor belt, unless you are very lucky and very, very healthy, they're going to kill you. And this is not meant to terrorize people or alarm people, but it is meant to warn people. Let's start right there. If you get a so-called COVID diagnosis, you need to be very clear with your medical. Well, Kimberly, one of the big problems is, and I realized this when I was talking to somebody who interviewed me yesterday. She said, "Gee, we all want to have faith in people need to have faith in their doctors." And I said, "But you don't understand. These are not your doctors.
Right.
This is not your doctor. This is the doctor who works for a hospital, who gets a paycheck for a hospital, who follows the orders of the medical administrator or of the hospital administrator, who's following the orders of his or her boss, who's following the orders from the federal government. This is in no way your doctor." So one of the thing that we're going to talk about on this call is what Kimberly and other nurses are doing ongoing. We touched on it in the book, and these some of the things that they're doing are very promising. But today I want to touch on the life-saving, death prevention aspect of this. So, Kimberly, one of the things we were talking about before I pressed record is that one of your many initiatives is you continue to go out and speak to nurses and nursing groups and other groups that have nurses in the audience sometimes about this issue. And let's talk about what your goal is in that initiative. Why do you do that part of what you're doing now? And what are you saying to these nurses and audiences?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important that we do continue to go out and we speak to nurses. I think that so many don't even realize what they are a part of, and they're going to need support once they start waking up to that. I've spoken at medical freedom events across the country, and I've spoken to different groups, not knowing. I always ask if there are nurses in the audience, and sometimes they won't say anything until later. They're like, "Oh, I didn't want to say anything, but yes, I am a nurse, and what you say makes sense." And it's all about asking like thought-provoking questions, like asking what, like we mentioned in the book, why is it that the only people that were dying were in the hospitals? People weren't dying from the virus at home, and they weren't dying on the streets. If you think about our homeless population, they were only dying in our hospitals. So once you start asking thought-provoking questions like that, people, nurses especially, who are trained to think critically and ask
Mhm.
questions, their wheels should start to spin a little bit, and then they should start to understand that there's something going on. I think when you're in it when you're right in the situation as nurses, we have that tendency to compartmentalize and not see the bigger picture, unfortunately. So I think it's
Well,
important to ask the questions.
there's so many things we can talk about here. In defense of the medical profession, let's take the example of a surgeon, because it's such a dramatic one, and I think everybody will grasp it right away. A surgeon takes a knife and cuts a human being open. They do have to compartmentalize. Now, luckily, they're skilled and they're trained, and they do it with the intention of helping, but they have to sort of suspend. A normal person doesn't take a knife and open somebody's abdomen. You know what I mean? Like, so part of medicine is being hyper objective. there are people that can't stand the sight of blood. There are people, if they see somebody injured, they freak out too. And medical people, and that includes nurses, have to, in order to enter and stay in the profession, develop this clinical viewpoint, and it can be used against them, as we know it was used against them with COVID. And let's talk about another element, because I think it's because hopefully some nurses are going to see this program. Uh, Remember where we were in March of 2020. We were told the most deadly virus that no, you couldn't even imagine how deadly it was. So you look at somebody across the street who has it, and you'd fall over and die. I mean, that's how ludicrous this thing was presented, right? And it was totally transmissible. If you walk down a country road without a mask, you're liable to get it. You're going to leave a stream of virus behind you that 5,000 people could get it, and grandmothers. I mean, but that's what we were told. Some people realized it was nonsense, but not everybody is equipped with education and experience to know that it was nonsense, and they were terrorized
Yeah.
very deliberately, very consciously. But even the nurses were scared because, it's scary. So you arrive in the ICU. Hopefully you're a trained ICU nurse. This is a whole nother issue. Why did they put, for the first time in history, I mean, maybe in the middle of war, you're going to have to grab people and put them in an ICU and just make it work. But this was not war. This was not even close. And yet they were putting untrained nurses who had never been in ICU before, who had no ICU training, no supervision. My understanding, I think I got this from Nicole. Maybe you can confirm this, or you may or may not know. They were putting in nurses that hadn't even gotten their degrees yet.
Yes, yes.
I mean, that is like, okay, somebody's like halfway through pilot school,
Mhm.
and we're going to put them in the cockpit of the 747 and let them fly the plane that you're on. Who
Yeah,
would,
they would give you like a provisional license where you could work like under another nurse until you took your exam. So they would be like through their clinicals, but they haven't passed their certification or licensure exam yet. So that's frightening. And to put them in that type of situation, but those types of nurses, Ken, are going to ask a whole lot less questions.
well, and listen, we can't blame them because they
Right.
didn't have a, part of the way the world works is hopefully the people that are employing you are trustworthy, right?
Yeah.
And that goes double for a hospital or a medical situation, right? So if you go into a situation not poorly trained, just not sufficiently trained, and the people above you are lying to you
Mhm.
and creating an environment of coercion, I I'm not gonna blame anybody in that situation. I don't think it's fair to. So there's so many issues here. There's so many issues here. But so we have to understand the climate that existed then. We have to understand that a lot of the people that were put at this work did not have the experience to even realize what was going on. It was veteran nurses who'd seen a lot who spoke out. Now, I think something we have to address, um, and it's just a rough back of the envelope estimate. What percentage of nurses attempted to speak up? Um, do we have I mean, there's probably no way of ever knowing what percentage. I'm going to guess it was 10% or less. I hate to say.
Probably less. I
Okay.
think probably less than 10%.
Okay.
There were very, very few of us early on. Um, there was Nicole Siratek spoke out, Nurse Erin, Jody O'Malley, myself, Ashley. There were very, very, very few. They're probably all in your book, Ken.
I missed a few. I'm finding out I missed a few, but
Yeah.
all right. So this is something that we have to, I never asked during the book. I was mainly focusing on what did these particular nurses see, who trying to realizing that they saw what they saw. They didn't see the whole world. They saw what they saw.
Right.
And then I wanted to talk about what they were doing after, what happened to them when they did speak out, and then what they've been doing since. So that was my focus. But now we're going to, drill down a little bit. So it was a less than 10% of nurses spoke up. Um,
Which there were more nurses than doctors, which was interesting. There were far more nurses than doctors that were coming forward.
Well, this is an interesting thing, and I can't remember who I said this to, so if I'm repeating myself, pardon me. You know, a doctor has to start thinking about becoming a doctor probably in high school. Not that nurses don't eat, doctors, nurses probably do too. In fact, one of the such an interesting thing about nursing is for those that have a genuine calling, they may have been thinking about it since childhood, early childhood.
I was two.
Yeah. But in terms of ramping up for the battle of school, they've got to start thinking about it in high school because they've got to get into a good college. And then once they're in a good college, they have to, I took courses. I didn't take pre-med, but I was in neuroscience courses with pre-med students, and they were samurai. I mean, these guys were not kidding around, and it was kind of, I'll be honest. Let me speak the truth here. It wasn't pleasant to be in a course with a lot of pre-meds.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah. Because it's competitive.
Mhm.
And in fact, I would say the atmosphere of that particular class had more of a competitive edge to it than a let's learn some great stuff edge. I'll just be frank, right? But that's the nature of the beast. If you want to go to medical school, you got to get into as good a school as you can, and then you got to ace all these pre-med courses, and then you got to pray that you get into a medical school. Really hard to get in. You want to get into a good one and all that. Then you got the 4 years of that, and then you're not a doctor yet. And now you've got to pick a specialty. And that could be a multi-year process and so they're into it for, let's say high school, 4 college, 8 medical school, 12, plus all their what they call residencies. Is that what they call it? Right.
Yeah.
So they may be in, I think they're probably into it at least 15 years. And it's not a pleasant, hey, I'm on a
No.
cruise. It's brutal, right? Then when they graduate, they've got, 300, 400, $500,000 medical school bill, educational bill. All right. And then they're not their own men or women. They are paycheck receivers. And this is not Marcus Welby, the nice old doctor with his little hometown practice who's, kind to everybody. They're working for some of the most savage corporations that have ever walked the face of the earth. And they're getting a paycheck. And as Mark Bishovsky, respiratory therapist, let us know, if you alienate one employer, the word gets out, and
Well,
even
you'll
if
get blackballed really quickly.
okay, there we go. So
Yeah.
so Mark's case, 23 years of respiratory therapy, stellar reputation, respected and beloved by all. And as soon as he started to make himself unpopular to the administration, he was blackballed as a respiratory therapist in his state. So not excusing the doctors, but trying to understand the doctors.
Yeah, well, I think that's all very intentional what they do. I mean, the like you mentioned the cost, that they incur just to go through all of these years of schooling, and then to speak out. You're going to get blackballed. You are having you're a paycheck employee. You have guaranteed salary typically for a period of time, and they're thinking about all of the debt that they've accrued. So it's difficult, right? I understand that they are in a difficult position and I wouldn't want to be in that position. But at the same time, I don't understand. I don't understand putting a paycheck above human life. I just can't do it.
Understood, understood. And when I say I want to understand, I'm not excusing or condoning. And of course, the other element to this was in addition to all the other crazy laws they passed, they were taking doctors from other countries.
Mhm.
Uh, and the more I look into this, I'm wondering how many of those guys were even doctors, because how much due diligence did they do?
Right.
I mean, because we know from talking with the nurses, they had podiatrists in the ICUs. They
Yep.
obstetricians.
Gynecologists in the
Yeah,
ICUs trying to intubate patients. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and we've talked about intubation. There's a nickname for the pipe, the hose that they put down people's throats into their lungs. It's called the garden hose.
Yeah.
Can you injure somebody doing that incorrectly? You can injure somebody
Absolutely.
fatally.
Yep.
And that in fact did happen. So you don't want an experienced person. And then you have someone like Nicole who was trained in that, a rare, very rare nurse because
Yes.
she was
Flight
doing
nurse.
air ambulance, flight nurse. So she knew how to do it. And things were so crazy that because she was trying to advocate for patients, they threw her off the ICU. They had one experienced hand, and they'd rather keep the regime in place than save lives. So this is what we're looking at. So Kimberly, when you talk to groups, what's your medical? Tell people what a medical freedom group is, because this may be a new concept to a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, and it's a group of people who are interested in having informed consent and the right to choose what goes into their body. And that's something as nurses that we should be supporting. That's autonomy. That is giving our patients all of the information, all of the education, and then they decide whether or not, based on risk versus benefit, whether or not that they want to participate in that intervention or take that drug or have that vaccine. And if they have all of the information and they choose not to, as nurses, we are to support that decision. That's autonomy, and which is one of the guiding principles of ethical nursing. So it's just having the ability to make your own choices about what goes into your body and your children.
Isn't it a reality that there is no perfect medical procedure? Maybe fresh air and sunshine, you
Yeah,
know, and even
exactly.
then,
Everything comes with risk.
right.
Everything comes with
Even
risks.
then, you can't be out in the sun, all day, every day.
Right.
So even that has risk. But generally, everything has a risk, and also everything has a probability of positive outcome. So it's not like, well, if we do this very dangerous thing, you're absolutely going to be fine.
Right.
They may do the procedure perfectly, or whatever it is they think is, and it may do absolutely nothing for you. So there's in investing or in business, there's this idea of the risk reward ratio. It's okay. What's the prize here? If this turns out well, where do I end up? And what is the likelihood that it's going to turn out well? Is it 50-50? Is it 90-10? And I'm not going to pick on surgeons here because I think very often surgeons are some of our best doctors. But sometimes some of them are a little bit over optimistic about the potential outcome of the procedures that they're practicing. Some of them, not all of them. Oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to be great for everybody. Maybe not. The other issue is this procedure really necessary? Maybe it would be an interesting thing for the doctor to do, but it may not be necessary. Maybe not be necessary. So I'm going to give. I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not your doctor, but I'm going to give everybody some medical advice. If a medical procedure is not necessary, you want to really think 10,000 times about whether you need to do it or not, right? So is it necessary? What's the prize what's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? What's the probability I'm going to get there? And what can go wrong? And how percentage wise, how often does it go wrong? And I'm going to guess, and you would know this better than me, Kimberly, not 1 out of 5% of all patients know to ask questions like that.
Exactly right. And that's why we try to impart how important it is to have a medical advocate in place, somebody who understands the complexities of the system, who knows what questions to ask. And even when you're educated and you know what questions to ask, it's different when you're the patient. A lot of times you just don't end up in that 5 minute window you might have with your provider, because it's not like you're sitting there for an hour with these providers any longer. They have them herding in patients like cattle. I think it's 7 minutes per appointment.
And I'm going to say something not very flattering to the medical community at large. There is a percentage of practitioners who take advantage of that moment of shock, that moment of uncertainty, to ram a suggestion down the patient's throat. Often, I'm telling you, I've heard this line too often for it to be not suspicious. It's a good thing you came in now, because if you'd waited one more day, and now we need to give you the $100,000 operation, let's tag you and put you in.
Right.
Be careful of that. There are emergencies. They certainly occur, but I'm afraid, and you can tell me, Kimberly, there's some practitioners out there with dollar signs in their eyes who know that you have a 5 minute or 10 minute window when you've given somebody's had some kind of an obvious problem. They don't know what it is. They come in, it's diagnosed. And that's a whole nother issue. We should talk about what diagnosis means. And it's diagnosed, and then immediately the answer is something really expensive, and
Yeah.
you need to do it now.
Yeah, but what if you think about orthopedics? If you go, I had gone in with a shoulder injury. I had hurt myself at the gym, doing some weight training, and I went in with this awful pain. I could not like raise my arm up. I couldn't do anything. I was miserable. But my very first visit, he was like, "Oh, yeah." He was like, "Okay, we're going to get you scheduled for surgery." And I was kind of taken aback by that. I was like, "Well, don't you want to try anything else, like some physical therapy, maybe some anti-inflammatories, like anything else? Why are we jumping right to surgery?" But that was so I wanted a second opinion, and every single ortho that I went to, it was the same thing. And I decided, I was like, I'm just going to wait it out a little bit. I'm going to do my own thing, and we'll see. It took a while, but it was an impingement. My shoulder was impinged. It took a while, but you know what? I ended up on the other side of that just fine without the risks of a surgery, a painful and very costly surgery. So I think it's important to realize that that's how they make their money, right? That is how they make their money. That's how they earn their living, and it's by getting surgeries on the books.
I had forgotten this story from my own life. I have a mild scoliosis, and it's kind of a pain. I can't do certain things, lifting, that I'd like to be able to do and that I used to be able to do. And when I was 14, that's when it appeared. And we went to, I'll name the hospital. I don't have any love for them. Columbia Presbyterian in New York City. That's because I grew up in that area. And this was the chief orthopedic surgeon. I wish I knew his name because I would name him too. And he told my mother and me that if I didn't get this surgery by the time I was 40, I would be so hunched over I wouldn't be able to breathe. Well, I'm happy to tell you I'm 60. Am I 64? I'm 64. Um, pretty darn functional. I'm breathing fine. This thing didn't spiral out of control. The surgery that they were recommending, basically, they break your spine, and they insert metal rods in, and then the rods literally fuse with your bone. And for the when they were recommending it to me, it was a full old-fashioned body cast, which I can't even imagine what that would have been like for 9 months.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's the ancient times.
Yeah.
And I guess that was and I instantly rejected it because I knew someone that had been through that surgery. I said, I'll do yoga, I'll stretch,
Yeah.
I'll eat garlic. I mean, whatever I have to do, I'm gonna find a way. And it's been quite a bit of work. I'm not going to say and it's ongoing work. But here's the thing, that's a super invasive operation, terribly invasive. And it doesn't necessarily work for people. There are people that have had that procedure, and they're in misery and they can't be helped anymore because their whole structure. I want to just throw this out. This guy's famous, Hans Kraus, I think. He was President John F. Kennedy's orthopedic consultant. And he also was the man responsible for the President's Physical Fitness Award. If anybody ever been through that, the country, even way back then in the 1960, was afraid that kids were getting really soft from TV and all this soda pop and all this stuff that the modern life was bringing. So he instituted that. He also had Kennedy within weeks of being out of his permanent back brace. I don't know if people knew this, but John F. Kennedy wore a back brace every moment of his life. And sadly, he didn't make it. He didn't get to enjoy life without a back brace. He was in a back brace the day he was shot, which is one of the reasons he couldn't duck. But anyway, I'm sort of going off on a historical thing. But he was an orthopedic surgeon, and he's old. He was old school. He was already way towards the end of his career by the time he met Kennedy. And what he'd concluded after years and decades of study, including going over to Austria and getting really high level training, because that's where the high level training was when he was a young man. Here's what he said, and long introduction to a simple thing. Backs don't like operations.
Yes, I'm telling you, I've been in healthcare for nearly 30 years. I've never met somebody who had back surgery who came out the other side of it better. You know,
Wow.
never. I said that's why I've always said I have a lot of issues with my spine, and I will never have any type of surgery on my spine. Never.
Yeah, we have to do things like, for me, I'm in front of this computer way too long. So I have disciplined myself. As soon as I feel twinges in my back, even a slight one, I'm up and I take a little bit of a walk, refresh my back. I used to just sit down and grind it through. We're not machines. We can't do that. I
Yeah, you
will,
got
I
to keep
will,
moving.
yeah, I will lay with a simple thing that really helps if it's gone too far. I'll lay on the floor right here in my office. Luckily, I work at home, and I'll put my feet up, and give myself 5 minutes just for everything to just unwind, and then I'll go back to the battle. I make sure I walk every day, maybe not 10 miles or 10,000 steps, but there are a lot of, and then of course there's yoga. Find a good teacher, though, not just any old teacher. There's good massage therapy. There's all kinds of things that we can do before we submit to an operation. And I'm glad you mentioned, you gave your clinical experience, Kimberly. Uh, this supports this fantastic doctor. Uh, Backs don't like operations. Now, there are times when you need an operation. If you shatter your ankle, well, masking tape and electrical tape's not going to work. Um,
But that's what's missing, Ken, out of informed consent in many cases is that they're not giving you the alternatives, right? There are many alternatives. You just listed a bunch of them to surgery, but they never tell you about those things. They just tell you you need the surgery or you're never going to heal, you're never going to get better. And that's not informed consent. There are many, many different alternative treatments, but unfortunately mainstream medicine just writes everything off as quackery and they don't tell you about these things.
it's very convenient. Anything that costs nothing or costs little
Yeah.
and that they can't get their hands on and make a lot is instantly quackery.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
but somehow hanging bags of remdesivir, a drug that was, an abject failure for Ebola, somehow that wasn't quackery. Um, you know, the, I realize it's an alliance of lawyers and doctors that made this catastrophe possible. They figured out, okay, let's figure out how to make a drug that we know injures people and doesn't really help mandatory, and that's and I think this tendency to let's go to the expensive hyper medical solution bled over into the COVID situation, except with the COVID situation, they added extra teeth, which is they took away the liability, at least temporarily. I don't know what the liability situation is now, but for a while there, if you were treating a COVID patient, I mean, anything went.
Yep.
You could, I mean, this is ridiculous. You could shoot him in the head and it would be okay
Yeah, it was
because
the Prep Act covered an awful lot as far as liability for everybody, physicians, nurses during that time.
so you take the natural tendency of our medical system, which is always pushing people towards a certain line, which whatever line they control, you add the liability-free environment, then you add the coercive environment. I mean, let's remind everybody, had you ever seen or heard of such a coercive environment in a healthcare setting in your entire career?
No, never.
And I'm sure they teach a little history of nursing when you get your degree. Did they ever teach you that once upon a time there was a terrible kingdom and they did things like this in the hospitals? I mean, I don't think in human history,
Mhm.
because it was so illogical to tell people ignore your own eyes. Ignore what you're seeing is happening to your patients and keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. I
We
don't
saw
think,
it. We saw it during, in Nazi Germany. We saw it with those nurses. So
well,
it's definitely happened.
in Germany, they were upfront about trying to kill these
Yeah.
people. They were
Yeah.
upfront about it. But here it was clothed in this, we're good doctors and nurses and we're doing the good thing.
Mhm.
But if you see that it's going wrong, don't say a word.
Yeah.
So we've gone off on a tangent. I apologize. Um, but I think these issues are really important. So medical freedom groups. Now, how many do you think there are in this country? You've probably got a database of them now after all your work you've been doing.
Yeah, they're cropping up everywhere. I mean, there was probably, I would say at least a couple in every state, but literally they are cropping up everywhere because people are starting to understand that their freedom, their autonomy, and all of that is really under attack. And I see a lot of people coming together, and it's crossing the political spectrum. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you fall on. If there's one thing that we should all be able to rally around, it's freedom and the freedom to choose what we put into our bodies. I mean, if you don't have autonomy, what else matters? If you don't have control over what we put in our bodies, what else really matters?
Yeah, and I think when we had the American Revolution, and which we should all be studying that in school. Somebody said that when the American Revolution started, this is just to encourage all of us, the our side, that was fighting for liberty, had about as many people on it, armed people, as a high school, as a large urban high school. That was the entire, and they were going up literally against the biggest army and navy the world had ever seen. So we started small. But the point I actually really want to make is they didn't include medical freedom in the Constitution because the idea of doctors and medical systems imposing, ruinous, destructive, injurious, fatal procedures on people against their will wasn't a thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, I'm not going to say medicine was perfect back then. There's a lot of things that we know now they didn't know, but everybody was trying to do their best.
Yeah.
So we don't have a medical freedom clause in the Bill of Rights, but that doesn't mean we can't assert one now. There had been like one or two medical freedom groups per state, and now they're just blossoming.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, if you think about it, there have been families that have been dealing with vaccine injury long before COVID, because these childhood vaccines have been injuring children. If you think about the um, uh, autism rates now, I think it's 1 in 39, it might be 1 in 33. Um, that have autism. And if you look at the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated data, it's pretty compelling. The instance of autism among the unvaccinated is virtually zero. So, whether you can believe what you want about that, but that's pretty compelling to make that connection between autism and a vaccine. So there have been parents and families that have been dealing with this for decades that have been just gaslit by the medical community, unfortunately, and bullied. But so those groups have existed for a long time. And they've been censored and again written off as crazy and all of these things by the medical community, which is really sad to me. And I feel like for a long time, I was part of the problem. I mean, I wasn't cruel to people, but I was very pro-vaccine. And I was like, you have to get your vaccine to save you. Like I was part of the problem for decades. And that's something that I'm dealing with and trying to process myself because I always asked questions, but for whatever reason, we implicitly trusted those vaccines.
Well, believe me, they did a very careful and thorough psychological operation on the whole population and the
Yeah.
whole medical community. I can just give experience I had. I was in a pretty rural part of Morocco, way out in the countryside, and it was pretty populated. There were a lot of people around. And I've never seen so many healthy, bright-eyed, bouncing kids. I mean, they look like the kids that I remember when I grew up.
Yeah.
And I don't see that when I go to the mall. it's not only are there overt injuries that are extreme, neurological injuries that result in autistic symptoms, which are and there's a they call it the spectrum,
Yeah.
but what they're missing, people go, well, I'm on the spectrum, or my kid. What they don't realize is at the way end of the spectrum, there is human suffering like you cannot believe. Like it's not a matter of, well, they're a little different,
Right.
maybe they got Asperger's or something. I mean, no, we're talking about. Well, we've done calls pre-COVID, how bad a child can be injured. So it's quite a bad thing. And in the U.S., we for some reason we feel the need to just vaccinate, which of course started the day that they were given immunity to product liability or injury claims. And let's say this because it's so important to know, if you go along with this and your child is injured, God forbid, you don't get to sue the maker of the vaccine, even if the vaccine was toxic, even if it was a bad batch, even if it was, they're scot-free. You have to sue Health and Human Services, which is
Good
the
luck with
federal
that.
government, and the lawyers that will represent the defendant is the Department of Justice of the United States.
Yeah.
And when the liability immunity was given to these manufacturers, the idea was there was going to be a special system so that, okay, when something comes up, we're going to deal with it and we're going to help these families. Well, when Bill Clinton came in, and if you remember all the sinister people he brought with him, and I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I hate them all equally.
Amen.
They changed the deal
Yeah.
radically. And what had been a difficult bureaucratic legal thing became absolute adversarial. The Department of Justice attorneys were told, give no quarter, make it as hard for them as you can, drag it on. And in law, the other side, they're getting their salaries, they're getting paid, they're eating every day. And meanwhile, the families are dealing with a catastrophic situation, emotionally, financially, time-wise. And the government's been told to just run out the clock on them, just keep it going, keep it going. So just know that if it goes wrong, and finding an attorney to represent you,
Good
let's
luck.
assume you've got all the money in the world. Not easy to find an attorney. And then they've couched the law in such a way that, well, he didn't manifest this fully until 91 days after the injection. Therefore, you don't even have a claim at all. He might have had a raging infection for 90 days or inflammation, and you didn't even realize how badly he was injured until the 91st day. But our little table here says, hey, 90 days if you don't report. Anyway, so we're going off a little bit on it, but we need to know this. So we've got medical freedom groups. They're springing up. Is there a directory that people can go to? I don't even know the answer to this myself.
Yeah,
Where
I've been looking for something like a large database. I actually wanted to create that when I began Nurse Freedom Network, that, like one-stop shop of different resources. And I don't know of any one that encompasses everything, but I mean, there are certainly some fantastic groups that you can go to. CHD has a lot of great resources, Children's Health Defense. Um, and I think it's nvic.org, has a lot of resources for vaccine injured. So there's definitely groups that you can go, but as far as like one that encompasses everybody, I don't think so. There's probably too many at this point to keep up with.
But it's like I guarantee that I'll just pick one company. Well, we'll pick Walmart. I guarantee Walmart knows exactly how many bottles of dishwashing liquid they have per
Right.
store in every store in their 50,000 stores in the world. So it's a matter of resources, and
It's
it
resources,
would take time and
exactly.
money to put this together. Maybe we'll talk about that after the call, because that seems to be a basic. You should be able to go to your computer, say, I live in Iowa, boom. Here's my list of medical freedom groups, names, addresses. How do I, where's their website? How can I go to their meetings? So So as you can tell, I like to go off on all kinds of tangents. So let's bring it back. So you go, when you go and speak to a medical freedom group, what is your message to the general public? And then what is your message to nurses in particular?
Yeah, and I usually tell them, I go and I tell them my story. I tell them about, how I'm a nurse, how I wanted to be a nurse since I was two, and this is all I've ever wanted to do. I tell them, what I saw during COVID and why that made me pivot to what I'm doing now, which is advocating for patient safety, for patient rights, and for informed consent. What we do with Remnant Nursing, we wanted to be able to create an opportunity for nurses who were ready to leave this system. It's a broken system. It doesn't serve the nurses and it doesn't serve our patients. So we wanted to find another way. So we've done that through Remnant Nursing, through a private membership association. And we found a way to provide care in a meaningful way to our clients, which is, something that every nurse wants to do. They don't want to just go and, check boxes. And that's basically what nursing had become. So we give them this opportunity to provide care in a meaningful way, and our patients, our clients, are receiving an exceptional level of service that they're just not used to anymore, unfortunately. So it's been an amazing thing to watch it grow. And as I alluded to earlier, we have advocacy services, and I cannot tell you how valuable this is, having worked through COVID and seeing what has happened through COVID, that having an advocate in place can literally be the difference between life and death. It
Yeah.
truly can be. So these are services that we provide through Remnant. We're able to provide advocacy services. We're also able to assist in procuring clean and unvaccinated blood for directed donation for blood transfusion. That's another thing that too many people aren't talking about, is that we've, pretty much completely tainted our blood supply. So it's important to understand that if you didn't get the vaccine and you don't want to get the vaccine and you don't want exposure to that spike protein, that you are able to get access to clean, unvaccinated blood if necessary.
There's another issue with transfusions and blood. Um, where do you think, and some of that blood comes from, I'll call them regular people that donate through the Red Cross.
Yeah.
Uh, but some of that blood, there is a big business in the Skid Rows of the world of, where people who are troubled, to say the least,
Yeah.
usually with substance abuse, and it's often, mental challenges, mental health challenges too. And this is how some people support themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Cell
Right.
plasma.
And that is the blood that's going into the blood supply. And I bet there are people saying, don't tell people, they'll get worried. It's like,
Yeah.
well,
You
you know
should,
what?
should be.
Like guys, here's the thing. If I see a pilot, for some reason I'm using airline analogies all the time now, Kimberly, to explain the situation. If I'm in the waiting lounge, right, and I see a pilot, throwing back scotches, and he's so drunk he can barely walk, and I see him about to get on a plane to pilot, I'm going to say something. I don't care if it's comfortable for the airline industry or for the patients or
Absolutely.
for the passengers. And I think there is this. I'm going to go really off on a tangent here. There is this like adult children of alcoholic syndrome. I don't know if you know this, but like I'm not going to get too into my background, but it was not pleasant. Um, and when you're in a situation like that, you have to be in super denial. You become the expert of keeping your head down and just going forward.
Yeah.
And you need to learn as you get older that there's certain behaviors that are not acceptable by other people, right? And you need either you get yourself out of them or call them on it. Um, and I have a feeling this syndrome of going along with the unacceptable is somehow baked into the cake of how medicine is practiced in our system.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's keep your head down, go along to get along, and people don't think that they can make a difference by speaking up, and they're not willing to put their entire career on the line. So they just put their head down, thinking that they can't make a difference. But I'm here to tell you, one voice can make a difference, and it does.
Well, let's switch to that then, and before we do that, let's look at a reality too. I mentioned before that Marcus Welby is gone. Like that was a 1950s TV show, and that probably wasn't even true back in the 1950s. But we did have local doctors. You did have your doctor who knew you and cared about you and was answerable to the community. Now we've transitioned to this new system where they're all getting paychecks. We also had hospitals that were actually like charitable institutions. And their mindset was, we set this hospital up to help the community.
Right.
That's gone, guys. I mean, maybe there's one last one, some outpost somewhere in some area that we don't even know about. But in the United States, that charitable orientation is out the window. And now you have some of the most cutthroat human beings running some of the most cutthroat corporations in the world, and they're operating our hospitals.
Yeah.
So that's why we have the problem. And I'm sorry, I took us off track there, but I wanted to emphasize the structural problem that we're facing. It's early for you, it's early for me, and I can't remember where I was. Speaking to nurse. Oh, that nurse. Oh, so okay. So when in this environment, it's no longer, I hate to say it, and Kimberly, call me on it if I'm wrong. It's no longer the wealth, being, and comfort and safety and positive outcome of the patient is up. This is it. This is what we're all about. No, there's the medical administrator that just sent out a memo, and then there's the fact that the staff is shorthanded because there's just not enough people because they won't put enough people on the floor because they're trying to save some money. And hey, CDC came down. By the way, I hate to go off on side issue, but I heard this yesterday or 2 days ago from a nurse in the UK. Blew my mind. The way they sold remdesivir, and you may not be aware of this because this is a medical administrator thing, is they said, listen, if you buy this remdesivir, not only are we going to pay you to give it out, the government's going to kick back. We're going to give you a discount on all the other drugs that you normally buy. It was like one of these like buy one, get one free.
Oh wow, no, I hadn't heard that. I know that they were giving financial kickbacks, and that was one of my biggest questions about this medication. I was like, why are we using it? We know that it doesn't help. We talked about that in the book, that those patients weren't getting to us in time for it for them to be in their replication phase, for it to be effective. And why are we using this medication that clearly does more harm than good? And why is the government financially incentivizing its use? That's a pretty big question I had.
Great. So
$3,000 per bag.
yeah. And now if you add the fact that, hey, if you go with this, we'll give you 50% off on all the psych meds that you normally pay X for, and you can charge your regular price and make your profit. So we know what you say to the general audience, and we know there's a thing called medical advocate. Tell us a little bit about that. What is a medical advocate? What does he or she do? What's their role?
Yeah, and if you ever go into the hospital, that they have what they call patient advocates that are supposed to be there to make sure that your best interests are being kept. But that those people are, again, hospital employees, so they are there for the hospital. They are not there to protect the patient. You need to have somebody that's completely outside of the system in order to ensure that you are having someone represent you and advocate for you on your behalf with your best interest and what you want and the decisions you are making that they're adhered to. So we do provide that service, and it's being able to talk to your care team, your doctors, your nurses, to be able to talk to them in a language that they understand, that you may not understand as a patient, and to be able to navigate the complexities of this healthcare system, which is extremely convoluted, as you probably well know, Ken. Nothing is cut or dry. It's all very convoluted. So having the ability to have somebody that is familiar with that and who is not afraid to ask questions. The nurses that we have are not the nurses that complied. You know, we are the nurses that are not afraid to ask questions. We're not afraid to question a doctor's order and say, well, you're recommending this, but what about this? And
Mm.
ask about other different alternatives. And you know, we're not afraid to put them on the spot, you know.
This is great. And so this is, you made a really important point. There's somebody with a title, patient advocate,
Right.
working for the hospital. But that's like, you know, I don't mean to put down law enforcement, but the police are going to investigate the misconduct of the police. It may not
Yeah.
work out that well. And that's the same problem with relying on the hospital paychecked advocate.
Right.
So
They're not
this
going
is
to buck the system. They're not
I
going
mean,
to buck the system at
how
all.
long are they going to keep their job if they do that? It's
Right.
a lot. The problem we have is structural. You know, like that's a structural problem. If the advocate is getting a paycheck from the hospital, we already lost the game.
Exactly.
So we all know that if we have a legal problem, we pretty much have to call a lawyer. We don't want to call a lawyer. We don't want to pay for a lawyer. It's a pain in the butt, but we know that to navigate the world of law, whether it's criminal law or civil law, you got to have somebody on your side. If you run a business and you're trying to figure out how to, handle these crazy regulations and taxes, you got to hire somebody to explain it to you, right? You don't, this is the same kind of thing. It's just we didn't know about it before. We didn't know how important it was before. Well, okay, it's 2023, soon to be 2024. Every conscious adult needs to know that there is a profession called nurse advocate. And you probably, just the way you know your lawyers in town and your tax accountant and that, you probably should be aware of this profession. And if you're in the system, if one of your, and it is very much like it's almost like, and I got to ask this, it's, there's a strange corollary or whatever between being arrested and in jail and being in a hospital. Like, well, you haven't been released yet. You got to wait till you're released. But wait a minute.
Yes,
I'm
exactly.
okay and I got things to do. Can I
And
leave? Well,
people
you
don't
haven't been
understand that
released.
they have rights, right? And that's another thing that's happening, is they're trying to literally hold people in the hospitals. I've had people come to us saying that they're being forced medications and interventions that they do not want. We just advocated on behalf of a 4-year-old, Autumn Shaw. She was some latest medical kidnapping victim, and the mother's only crime, the parents' only crime, was advocating for their child and asking questions about their suggested therapies that they were using that were really harming this baby. You know, the third leading cause of death in this country is preventable medical error. So, you know, it's okay to question and say, you know, is there something else? That's all that the mother was asking was, is there an alternative or something that we can use that isn't going to really assault this baby's system? They literally threw this baby into renal failure by their interventions, nearly killed her. And we were able to successfully get her out of that situation. But as the mother started asking questions, very respectful, the mother's very knowledgeable and she's asking questions, and they immediately contact CPS and try to strip these parents of their parental rights. So it's really important to understand that unless you're going to just go along with everything that they say, you are at risk of having your self-reported to CPS and your child taken away from you. That is very, very common now. So it's so important to have an advocacy team in place. And nobody thinks that they need an advocate until they do.
Right.
Don't wait. You have a plan in place. That is, whether it's my organization or another organization, I don't care. Just have a plan in place for advocacy, because you never know when that need is going to arise, and you don't want to be behind the 8 ball when it does.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. And the acronym that you use is different in different states, but basically it's Child Protective Services.
Yes, yes,
And
Child Protective Service.
the goal of that, when it's running functionally, because there are absolutely situations where children are being horrifically abused by their caretakers and they need protection. Unfortunately, has become, I don't think there's any doubt anymore, it's become weaponized. Um, we've done pre-COVID, we did a lot of stories about that. Anybody can call in a complaint against any parent anytime with no liability. In fact, there's a team of I don't know if they're still operating, but there's a team of women in the United States, supervised by some people in the UK, who make a habit of going to Facebook family groups, finding families that are dealing with vaccine injured children, and exploring alternative treatments. And they will find out the name and addresses of those families and call in a child health. They don't know the family, they don't know the child, they don't know the anything, but they've deemed in their ignorance that you shouldn't be trying this, you shouldn't be trying that, you should only do what the doctors say, and if you're doing anything else, you're committing a crime. And so what Child Protective Services means, or whatever it's called in your state, is somebody shows up at your door unannounced, often with a cop or two, and they want to get into your house and start looking around. And yeah, so that's that a hospital would do that to a family that is simply asking questions about their sick child is, I mean, it just shows you how far off things are. We're way beyond. I mean, the British Empire, what it was doing to the American colonists was nothing compared to what this system is doing. And it is a system, and that's the problem. I mean, it's as big as the Pentagon, it's as big as any of these big organizations. And my experience is, from reading history, and somebody can tell me if I'm wrong, the bigger the organization, the more likely it is to be sinister and corrupt. I'm sorry. I mean, that's what history tells me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
And
what do you,
it's more common than you would think.
yeah, and you've been, as you were before on the original research for the book, you've been incredibly generous. And I don't want to impose on your time, but I want to ask one other thing, and then I'll let you go. And I got to tell you guys, you can't believe how generous the nurses have been with me. It's just unbelievable. Even this book's you got your copy, right?
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so
At
much.
some point, the guy that's helping me with the layout and all that kind of stuff, I was just putting stuff in, and he said, "Hey, Ken, we're coming up on 500 pages. Do you think maybe we can like pull it back a little bit?" I'm like, "Oh my God." But anyway, I want to talk about one other issue,
Yeah.
and we kind of started there, and it's full circle. There are a lot of nurses in this world. I don't even know how many, certainly more than a million.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
How many nurses do you
I
think
can't
there are?
remember what the number was. I used to know, I knew the number in the early days of the pandemic, and
Yeah.
now I forget.
Well, you know what? The numbers changed because so many have
Yeah.
left the profession.
Yeah.
But it's more than a million. It's a big
Oh
chunk,
yeah.
big chunk of our society. Because I think that, believe it or not, I think there's a million doctors, which kind of blew my mind when I got that number. So there must be a multiple of a million nurses.
Yeah.
So not all of them, obviously, but a bunch of them were in this environment and are still in environments where these things are happening.
Yeah.
What do you say to them?
I want to impart on the nurses, that you have to really search yourself and realize that there's a better way, and that there are opportunities outside of the system. If you see something, please say something. Our first duty and our moral obligation is to be standing in the gap for these patients. If we as nurses are not standing for these patients, who's going to stand for them? This is what we need to do. There are other opportunities out there, and we're going to work together to create this parallel healthcare system. But it takes all of us coming together and investing in and creating this. It's going to be life changing not just for our patients, but for ourselves as nurses as well, to be able to create and forge this own path forward. You have to know that there's a better way.
Great. So there's really two paths forward. One is to create an alternative
Right.
system, and two, to continue to put pressure on the system as it is.
Exactly. Even
It,
if we can't burn it to the ground, which is what I often say, even if we can't do that, the more, relevant we become, we really hold their feet to the fire, and they have no choice but to become more accountable, or they won't be relevant themselves.
and of course, you mean that metaphorically, burn it to the
Right.
ground. But
Yes.
that is,
Yes.
but we have to be careful in this
I
world.
know.
But I mean, that's a legitimate construction renovation technique. I saw it done just a couple of months ago in my area. there was a building and they wanted to build a new building there, and they could have disassembled it with the permission of the fire department. They just set it on fire. They burned it to the ground. It was a lot quicker, and they built a good one from scratch.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
hey, I said it was the last question, but I have to ask one more. So you have nurses on your team for the advocacy, and your
Yeah,
group is called. Could you tell everybody the domain?
sure. Remnant Nursing, remnantnursing.org.
Great. And do you have legal people on your team? Does this ever get escalated to a legal level?
So we don't have anybody on our team, but we have people that we refer to. So for our members that are in need of legal assistance, we will typically, and that's what we're building a database of resources for legal resources and, just like-minded individuals that can be helpful in situations like this. So we don't have anybody specifically on our team, but we do work with many, many people.
Because it can escalate to the point where, wow, we got to get an attorney calling the hospital and reading the
Absolutely.
Ryan Act.
And that's what we did for this medical kidnapping cases. We brought in all of our, our network, through our network, our resources. Mark Bishofsky actually worked on that case with us as well, the
Oh, really?
respiratory therapist. Yeah. So he was a huge help and advocated and spoke with hospital personnel and respiratory therapists for this little girl that they had on a ventilator when she did not need to be. Yeah.
I mean, well, we're going to stop this. We're going to
Yeah.
stop it one case at a time. Remnantnursing.org,
Yes.
and people can, I would recommend everybody educate themselves about this issue right now, whether you have a problem or not, so that if it does come up, you're ready. You know where the gun is. You know where the ammo is, and you can
Exactly. It's
go.
listen, $30 a month to join. It's we don't have any financial backing. It's all membership driven, and that's our mission. Is we don't want to accept a large amount of money from these big organizations or big corporations, because then we have to worry about messaging and all of that. They going to try to dilute what you're doing? So we're a very self-sustainable model, but it's $30 a month to join and have access to what can be life-saving interventions and life-saving advocacy.
And it's $30 to be a member. And then, of course, if it's a complicated case, now you're paying this for the services of that case.
Correct. Yeah, you can purchase bundles of advocacy hours. You can, or you can do one-off consultations with our nurses. We keep all of our prices pretty affordable, as low as we possibly can, because we want this to be accessible to everyone. But at the same time, we still have to be able to pay our nurses who put a lot of time and effort into these cases.
So basically, it's about $1 a day to be in the network.
Correct.
And then when you, God forbid, you need it, you're already in.
Yeah.
And you can start, hiring people as needed. Hopefully, it's a simple thing that can be resolved fast, but you can go all the way to the point of connecting, networking with attorneys to bring in the real firepower and saving these people's lives.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And what I usually recommend to people is that you can join for $30 a month. I always recommend doing a consultation with the nurse, which is $200. It's a 60 to 90-minute consultation. It goes through all of your medical history, everything, so that if something arises, we have all of your information right there, and we're ready to go to bat
okay.
for you. So we have all of your medications, all of your allergies, all of your medical history, and we're there and equipped, because time is of the essence in situations like this.
You can do it can you do like a whole family at once? Like, Billy
Yeah,
has
and
this and Susie has that.
yeah, we have family pricing as well.
Uh, you know, people who have foresight make sure they've got at least a week's supply of food at home. Some people have more. I do. Because stuff happens. I live in the
Right.
in the snow belt, and we could have a week of heavy snow, and the trucks aren't getting around, and we can't get to the store, and so this would fall under the umbrella of being prepared
Yes.
for things that happen. Um, Great. Well, this is very good, and this would be a great thing for a grandparent to buy for their their children who have children, or for families, because we have to end this somewhere, so we better end soon, because you've already
Yeah.
given way more time than I think is fair. But I appreciate you were willing to.
Sure.
We're mortal flesh.
Yeah.
You know, and it would be nice to believe that we're bulletproof and that our children are bulletproof and that our parents are bulletproof and that we're all bulletproof, but we're not.
Right.
And you know, everybody's worried about crime and all the war and all this kind of stuff. Well, that, you may not be a victim of crime, you may not be a victim of war, but you are mortal flesh, and even if it doesn't happen to you, it may happen to someone you love and care about. So, you know, we used to back in the when I was a boy, you know, we had a first aid class in grammar school. They
Oh,
don't do that anymore. I don't know why not. That's a whole other issue. But this is like first, this is the same thing. It's the same idea. If somebody gets hurt, what do you do? It's good if you knew in advance. You don't want to break out the first aid book and, you know, be what, okay, now what do I do here? It's too late. And I think it's the same thing. We've got this big medical system. Sometimes they can work miracles and do amazing things, but you're dancing with a. I hate to say it, but it's accurate. You're dancing with a monster,
yeah.
and maybe you can have a nice dance with the monster if you know that it's a monster and you've got to handle it. You know. So anyway, Kimberly, thank you so much for again
Sure.
giving more time than is reasonable. Keep up your good work.
Thank you.